Hey there, you're listening to Making Spaces, the podcast about community, culture, and making new connections, hosted by my good Judy, my friend and yours, Sarah Heath. On this podcast, we're having conversations about design, literally making spaces, and how some of the most inclusive spaces aren't always the most inviting. And we're talking about what it means to make space for one another. With the world the way it is right now, we need to find ways to have conversations across lines of radical difference. So join Sarah each week as she tackles the intersection of design and practical spirituality with conversations with some of the most fabulous guests you're ever going to meet. Some will talk about actual design, some of us will talk about relational design, but no matter what, it's an incredible time. So grab yourself a cup of whatever you like, and welcome to Making Spaces with Sarah Heath.
Things go viral all the time. I was like, This was just like a one-time thing. I'm not a poet. What is this? Like, I was like, this is nothing. But the thing that really broke me out of that in 2017 was I started to receive messages from people who had that particular poem had just resonated with them in some way. And it was when I started getting messages from teenage girls that it really sort of humbled me in a lot of ways. And I started to see, I was like, oh, wait a second. All this time, I've been trying to write for this imagined critic somewhere in the sky, you know, who's going to validate my work. And I was like, actually, all along, I just needed to write what I needed to hear 10 years ago.
Friends, you may already know this week's guest work, but you may not know her by her full name, Morgan Harper Nichols. She is an incredibly talented creative, a poet, a musician, and a visual artist. Her well-known Instagram poetry and visual art is signed with the simple letters MHN and is all based on the personal stories that her followers send her. Today's conversation centered around what it's like to make space for others and their stories while letting go of the fear of criticism and comparison. Morgan is such a gift, and this conversation was inspiring and challenging. Make sure you stick around at the end of the episode for the weekly space-making takeaway and an inspiring quote. This is not your first rodeo at all.
But it is with you, so...
That's true.
Because we were supposed to, like, do something forever ago, back in March. Which seems like actual ages ago.
I mean, I've aged at least 2 years since March.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a good way of putting it. It's like a year older a month.
Yes. It's like dog years all of a sudden.
Yeah. That's a really good way to put it. It really does feel that way.
It's been crazy. How are you guys doing in the midst of this?
Oh man, we are hanging in there. So I'll just cut to it. Like I no longer have my studio. That's just gonna have to be on pause for a little while. Oh. So we just opened that, and our company is just going all remote, and we're actually moving temporarily to Arizona for a little bit.
Oh no.
Yeah. So
is that, you know, I get it. I get
it. It's one of those things. It's really precautionary. It's like, thankfully, like we've been able to keep everyone employed and we still have work. It's just like a lot of the income and revenue we were expecting for events. Like we literally got our events, our space for events. So
yep.
That's why I was like, I'm bummed about it, but it's more of like a collective sorrow, because it's like, oh, everyone's dealing with this. You know, it doesn't feel like a personal... I mean, yeah, it hurts personally, but it's not like... I feel like I've been good about it in terms of like, okay, yeah, this sucks, but it sucks for everyone right now. So yeah, it's all good though. I honestly feel good. So thank you for asking.
Yeah, I've just been thinking about you guys because you launched your store, and we'll go into that in a little bit. But I mean, my gosh, what a time to like... I feel like the last time I was with humans was when I was at your like birthday party / store launch.
Yeah. Yes. Back in January. Oh my goodness. Who knew what was to come?
I couldn't have guessed. I could not have guessed.
Yeah.
So the question I usually open up with is, and this is going to be fun talking to someone who is artistically minded, is where is a space that you really love? And it can be any sort of space. It can be like a actual room. It can be like a chair. It can be anything. Where is a space that you love?
A space that I love is... I feel like this is such a nerdy response, but
I cannot wait.
In the company of books. Like, I love to be around shelves of books.
Okay.
It's just something about the idea, because I oftentimes am I tend to get in my head a little bit, and I'm very hard on myself sometimes. Like,
you don't
even though I'm a writer and an artist, I'm like, oh, should I be spending this time sitting here writing out thoughts? Like, who am I to do this? You know, that whole imposter syndrome thing. And I just looked at that shelf and I'm like, it is highly likely that between these binds, there are hundreds of people behind me who have dealt with the same thing.
Oh, it's 100%.
And it's just something about that visual, whether I'm in a bookstore, which I really appreciate bookstores now because I can't go to them.
Right.
I love bookstores. And I just, when I go over friends' houses, like, I like to look at shelves that they have. And I don't know, it's something about that it's very calming to me. It's been a constant in my life. Like, growing up, we didn't have a lot of money, but my mom used to take us to half price day at the thrift store. So all the books were like 50 cents. And we would just pile up on books. And yeah, it's just a lot of positive memories for me. And especially during these times where, you know, I can't go a lot of the places I used to go. That's even more special for me now. So,
well, I am going to ask you a really odd question, follow-up question to that. How do you feel about the smell of old books? Because I love the way old books smell.
I do too. Except for when they smell like cigarette smoke. So
fair.
There are times where that's like, okay, I could do without that smell. But yeah, there's something about those pages that just, it unlocks something for me. I like to buy a lot of used books online too. Because it's so fun because they'll just come from different like small bookstores and thrift stores from all around the country. And you just never know, like there's writing in the margins and that smell. Yep. I love it.
Well, that is awesome. And I think there is something to be said about like, oh my gosh, I can see where this person was trying to write, and they also had the fears that I have. So it's like a shared space too.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I actually recently found out about, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm getting so nerdy.
I love it.
I recently discovered this term. I didn't even know there was an actual term for it called, and I may be pronouncing it wrong, but marginalia, and that's marginal notes. It's writing in the margin. So that's like an actual term. It's an actual thing of like that people have studied the things that have been written in the margins of books and ancient texts, and how that gives you more insight to the time. Yeah, just Google it. It's really fun. I think
I would love that.
Yeah.
I am such a nerd. I love this stuff. I think there's this beautiful thing where we have this sense of permanence of people when we look at books and things like that. We can see where this is not the first time this has been done. This is, and there's a lot of comfort in that.
Yes, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I enjoy being able to, like, I actually get excited when I read something that someone else has said and I feel like they said it better than I did, because I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not the only one who's felt this or thought this. And in a way, you're just kind of standing on the shoulders of a lot of people who've come before you. So, yeah, I love that.
Yes. So you are, trying to describe what you do. You are a musician. You are a visual artist. You capture people's stories. You're a writer. You wrote poetry before you wrote poetry about other people's stories. So you've got like all these sort of skill sets that are just beautiful. And the thing that I love is that you don't just like write these beautiful poetry about like what's in your head. You actually kind of take other people's stories, which makes space for other people's stories. And we met as you were just starting this project.
Yes.
And I know you have to talk about it a lot, but would you mind sharing a little bit about what that looks like and how that has it's really resonated with so many people. Like my favorite thing that happens to me is people will text me like, hey, this just reminded me of you. And they'll text me like your artwork. And I'm like, that's awesome. That's my friend. I know MHN.
That is.
So can you tell a little bit about what you do? Because I think it's fantastic.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you. So for the past 3 years almost, I have been writing and making art as a response to messages and emails and Instagram DMs that I receive. So my whole life, I've kind of always thought in color and imagery and just random imaginative poetic language, but I never really knew what to do with it. So I was like, I don't really want to share this out loud. I don't really think people would care to hear it. I always just kind of felt that way. So in 2017, I think it was a culmination of a lot of things that are happening in my life. A lot of, I've always felt like I was meant to be creative, but at the same time, it didn't seem like there were any opportunities, like sustainable opportunities for me to do it professionally. Mm-hmm. So it was like, there would be little flickers of hope here and there. Like, oh, maybe I can have, all this, I can try in the music industry and all these different things. And I had opportunities, which I'm really grateful for. But in terms of like sustaining enough to, pay the rent every month, it was a struggle. And I really struggle with that because I spent the first half of my 20s just really, really trying so many different things. So I had a resume that was just like an all over the place, stereotypical creative, resume, like barista over here, photographer over there, graphic designer, all of it. Just your stereotypical millennial creative resume that some people might say. I don't know. But anyway, so I was really struggling with that because I was like, wow, I feel like I'm failing. I feel like I've let people down who've supported me because I haven't, my career hasn't taken off or whatever. So I essentially wrote this poem that was a lament. That was a lot of that feeling. And I shared it on Pinterest, and a few months later it had been repinned over 100,000 times. And
I remember you saying you were like, it was what? Who? How?
Yeah.
This is the thing? This is the thing that takes off?
Yeah, I was like, oh, after all of this I've done, I'm talking like moving to Nashville, like doing all the things, like signing record deals, everything. For
the early or the late or the early millennials listening, a record deal was this way that you could make money from being a musician. Yeah, that's changed.
It is wild. It is wild. So yeah, after trying all of these things, going into debt, all of this, I ended up writing this poem that's, I think, like 12 lines, maybe even less. And it was just this sort of admitting, I guess, to myself, I guess, to God, like, hey, I feel like a failure. And I don't really know what to do with that. So I wrote this poem about it and I ended up sharing it. And as it turns out, a lot of other people can relate to that feeling. So
I have something funny to tell you, and I don't think I've ever told you this.
Oh.
I pinned that like on my like board way back in the day, not knowing that the person I knew as Morgan Harper Nichols was MHN.
The same person. Oh my gosh. I love that.
And I was like, oh, I just love these words.
I actually love that.
Turns out it's my friend.
Now I kind of wish you never found out. I feel like that would been even more fun.
So you found out it was pinned. I didn't mean to take you off track, but you found out it was pinned.
I love that. So yeah, after it had been shared a lot, I would love to say that I was just I was like, this is the thing. But even then I was really cynical. I was like, I was like, things go viral all the time. I was like, this was just like a one-time thing. I'm not a poet. What is this? Like, I was like, this is nothing. But the thing that really broke me out of that in 2017 was I started to receive messages from people who had that particular poem had just resonated with them in some way. And it was when I started getting messages from teenage girls that it really sort of humbled me in a lot of ways. And I started to see, I was like, oh, wait a second. All this time, I've been trying to write for this imagined critic somewhere in the sky, you know, who's going to validate my work. And I was like, actually, all along, I just needed to write what I needed to hear 10 years ago.
Oh, I have goosebumps. Yes. Yes.
And I was like, that's who I want to talk to.
Right.
I was like, if people unfollow, if the critics come and say, this isn't real poetry, this isn't this, I'm like, that's fine, because I'm not writing for them. I'm writing for her. And that was the year that I was like, okay, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm literally just going to write to people that respond to me. And that was the first time in my life. I've been creating things in many forms my whole life. That was the first time where I felt like I really sort of ignited this creative flow that wasn't so like boundaried by self-doubt. I mean, I still have it, but I didn't feel limited by that. I was just like thoughts, until this day, like thoughts would come in my head of like, oh, I could hear a critic saying this about this piece. And I'm like, I don't care.
Because it's not for them.
Yeah, like I literally don't care. I'm sure they're wonderful people, but it just wasn't for them. And that is still my response to this day. Because, you know, I'm not at all attacking dudes. But till this day, a lot of times I get messages from guys who say things like, oh, that didn't resonate with me, or I don't agree with that. And I'm like, all due respect.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. But all due respect, like, this was written for a high school girl. Like, I don't think you guys may not have the same experiences. You may not be looking through the world through the same lens. So yeah, it's being able to share, to make art where it's like a response to one person at a time. For me, it's just taken so much of the pressure off, honestly, because the pressure is real. There's just so much pressure to try to be this deep, profound, speaker.
Yep.
Like, even if you don't consider yourself an artist, when you just consider what's going on in the world, a lot of times people feel like, oh, well, what can I say? Because I'm not a theologian. I'm not a philosopher, and it can really, I think, limit a lot of people's creativity. So yeah, that's what I do. I make art in response to one person at a time. And yeah, I've been doing that for 3 years. And honestly, it
is hitting people in such incredible ways. And I think there's this beauty to, like, you've made space for other people's stories in a way that they can remain anonymous. They can see it in beauty. They can see it in hope. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of got that, because you've made space for one person, it makes space for a lot of people, because the number of people who read what, is definitely created for one person, but say, oh, that was created for me without your knowledge. It's kind of this like mystery, or I would call it like this divine experience of that which was, a space for one is actually a space for a multitude. I think that's incredible.
Yeah,
incredible.
So thank you. I'm really passionate about that. Like, I think that there's a lot of, loneliness in the world. I mean, I don't think that is true.
That's
There's
true.
a lot of loneliness in the world, and I know for me, a lot of the times where I've felt the most lonely, the times where I was most hurt, it was through a song, it was through art, it was through comedy, it was through some sort of creative, thing. So I try to hold on to that, because I definitely think that art is a way to help people, even if it's created with one specific person in mind, like, it's a way to help people feel seen. So
yeah, I was wondering a little bit, so we're recording this after there has been another instance of police brutality. And it's so interesting as a speaker, and then for you as an artist and a speaker, how does one respond in a way that kind of holds on to the pain, magnifies the voices. And I loved what you wrote yesterday in response. Was that in response to the story, or was it in response to someone else having sent you something?
That was actually in response to myself. Because in doing this and writing for people for years, I eventually had to come to terms with the fact, and I think it kind of happened when I was writing my first book, of like, okay, I have to, yes, I'm writing for others, but I'm also speaking from my own pain and my own stories and my own experiences. So I have started to, when I feel something like burning inside of me that I just want to say, or I'm just like, I gotta say this, I gotta get this down, whether I end up sharing it or not. I've really started to pause and see that, okay, sometimes, this means I need to go into my DMs, I need to go in my email, and I need to respond to someone. But I was like, sometimes I need to respond to myself. And that's kind of what started this whole thing, was just like responding to myself. So I think for me, when I shared that piece, and the piece is just about like not letting people shame you for having open wounds.
Yeah,
and
I think I'd love to read it, because
sure, yeah.
If you don't mind, it says, when your heart is bent towards justice and you feel the weight of what has not changed, and you are so tired of fighting a fight that keeps taking on new shapes, it does not make you weak. When your tired heart is broken, do not let them shame you because your wounds are still open. Like, I can't read that without getting goosebumps.
Yeah.
And it makes space for your story, but it also, I think about people who are just tired. I mean, tired is particularly my friends who are people of color, they're just tired.
Yeah.
They're tired. Yeah,
that's exactly what it is. And, as all of this was, unfortunately unfolding in the news, I felt like this pressure at first of like, okay, what can I say to help people call to action? And there were just so many moments where I just like broke down. I mean, my physical body just felt so tense, and I'm clenching my fists, and I'm like, you know what? Like, I need to make space to grieve. I'm like, this is traumatic. It's traumatic for me, someone who grew up hearing stories of my own father, who was a child of a sheriff, having to deal with police brutality. He did nothing. Someone thought he looked like a guy who did something down the street. And this was in the 80s, My dad's not, it wasn't like in the 50s. This was not that long ago.
And he's such a charismatic,
kind
man.
Yeah, exactly. And hearing stories from my mom, who told me stories also in the 80s, like, oh yeah, in high school we couldn't go to that town because it was a sundown town, and black people couldn't be there after dark. And it's like growing up hearing those stories, and then being an adult and saying, why are we still here? I'm like, yeah, I don't, for that pain, I don't have a step-by-step, I don't have here's what you can do. I'm like, I just need to be sad right now. Like, I just need to grieve right now. And I was like, yeah, this is something that I just need to talk to myself about, because there are times where, I'm writing for others, and issues of race and inequality definitely come up, and I definitely write to that a lot. But I do think that there's something important about, like, even if you are actively, helping others, like, you have to really take care of yourself in a way, and say, hey, I need to grieve this too. Like this. So for me, that's what that was. And I also want to be careful to not make it about me, like, I'm like, this isn't about me. Like, I didn't lose my life here, but at the same time, I just wanted to add and say, hey, just so you know, like, yes, there's a lot of people out there who are really working hard, and it is a brave fight, but it is also an exhausting and tiring fight. And I just wanted to make space to hold all of that.
Oh, I think it's key. I think especially as women, I feel like sometimes we we immediately go to what can I do? How should I react to help other people react? And if you have any kind of platform, mine is a smaller platform, but it definitely like, okay, I feel like I can get people to do something. And what we don't realize is the toll it takes on us. And yet there is power in even saying, but this is a struggle. And we are in the midst of, you've got a son. How is your son going to grow up in the world?
Exactly.
Is he going to grow up feeling afraid of the police? Is he going to grow up feeling, protected? Some of the spaces that exist in the world are so, white centric. And how do we change that, respond to it? I mean, as a Caucasian woman, I know for me, sometimes I'm like, this is not a place for me to speak, but it's a place for me to amplify other people's messages, because you don't need to hear another white woman saying something. It feels like, but then again, I hear what you said earlier in the conversation is, but we got to make space for ourselves, and we have to make space for letting go of the critic, because the critic will come. The critic will come, and I read a quote one time that was like, they're going to criticize you anyway, so you might as well do the thing that you feel is your thing. We're going to take a brief break from this conversation to listen to some messages from our sponsors that make this podcast possible. I just see your story as one where you were kind of circling this thing that has just caught on for people. And although it, there's been different iterations of it, I just love that it was the thing that when you just kind of just did the work or continued in the space that like kind of just, okay, I'm going to press into work. Because you never could have imagined, could you have, that you would be like designing things that would go into Target? Like to me, that's like that is the key. I mean, what can I make that gets into Target? But I think there is, space and room, and like, even as your book is one of my, I love it so much. And I read through it, and I did this thing where when we started sheltering in place, I started reading a poem once a week just online. And I haven't done it as much as I should have. But what's interesting is like thousands of people would watch just for me to read someone else's words. But it's again, that thing where you're being specific, but it's like the space that you're making is very specific. But once you like commit to making that space, it like opens up, Yeah. So like, you're making space for other people's stories, and now more people feel like their stories are legitimized.
Yeah.
Or heard.
That is absolutely, and it never ceases to surprise me and just completely just amaze me in the best way possible, because it's interesting to me, because it's like I get to experience by making art in response to one person at a time, like I get to experience for myself, it's healing for me, because I'm like, this is directly addressing the wound that I've had for a very long time of feeling too different, feeling not enough, like I didn't belong, things that I was actually told by people that I looked up to, that my work wasn't this, or I didn't belong here. And, I remember a lot more of that stuff than I wish I did. I wish I was better at forgetting. But I also remember lots of random useless information too. So it's not all that. But I have a really sharp memory, and I remember a lot of things. I remember things that, like there's this one particular thing that this guy said to me in college that I still have to work through that. Like I still work through it. And they were just words, but they were words that made me aware of this divide between his world and mine. And so, for me to use words to connect with someone else, I'm like, I just imagine, I'm like, I just think that it is very likely that there is also another girl out there in college who was just told something similar to what I was told. And I may not be able to fix that or undo that for her, but yeah, I know it would have mattered to me to have been able to have positive things on social media where I'm seeing all of these other people doing all these things. And so, yeah, that's
so interesting, because I think about, as people are scrolling through social media, there really is this negative effect that can happen. I know for me, as someone who isn't married and doesn't have kids, and those were always things that I was hoping for in my story. And so there are days of the year that are really hard because they're just filled with pictures of children or whatever it might be. And I think,
and I can imagine even now, because everyone's at home and you're just seeing like, oh, look at us, we're bonding as a family, you know, it
can be, and then to see and come across this, like, it's always like this space that you make for, hey, like, this isn't, the story is not over, whatever it might be. And it is incredible to me how it is just shown up when people need it the most. And so I think it's true sometimes I won't even say sometimes, I know that it's true when we are willing to have a divine wound, and to, in a helpful way, look at that wound and share it. And oftentimes we create what we need. Right. And I think, you helping 10 or 20 years ago, Morgan, it's helping the world in such a incredible way. And we need those voices right now. And we need that, we need the space of positivity and feeling like there are, even I think about the girl who's seeing someone who looks like them doing this kind of work. I just think representation is so key. Like sometimes I have to show up in spaces where, having ovaries is weird for the people in the space. And I think as a woman, sometimes I don't want to go into those spaces, but I think sometimes representation and the number of times, you as a person of color, but also someone who is a artist and grew up in so many different places, if people can see the space that you occupy. And I know as an introvert, you've done it in so many different ways, but it's it even gives a safe space for introverts to feel like they can really communicate with someone. Cause I think introverts you guys have been branded as you don't like people, which is not true at all. You love people. They just exhaust you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you mentioned social media, because I think that and I think it's changing, but for a few years there, I mean, at least I was listening to lots of podcasts and reading a lot about, marketing and social media. And a lot of what I heard was and it's not wrong, but I've learned, and I think I've proven that there's more than one way of doing it. And a lot of what I heard was, you got to show your face. You have to tell your story. People want to hear the nitty gritty details of all the things you do. And at least that's how I'm interpreting it. I'm hearing it. And even I would look at other musicians, and I was in music full time, and I would see them, the way that they interacted with their audience and the way that they were, crowd surfing and doing all these things. Gosh. And I was oftentimes like, okay, I can't do that. And in today's time, I would interpret it differently. But back then, I interpreted it as, I'm not enough. Like, I'm not good enough clearly I'm not good enough because they're successful. I'm not. They're getting invited to the festivals and the tours. I'm not. So,
well, and part of your story is you have a sister who I didn't realize
who is more high energy.
Right. And I didn't realize, because I'm just now getting on the YouTubes for this podcast, actually. Yes. But I didn't realize that she was, a musician that had gotten, and I think I'm getting this story right, she had gotten pretty well known because of YouTube. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I cannot imagine like having that as a younger sister.
Seriously, my younger sister, first of all, she's amazing.
She's so great.
She has Tourette syndrome, and she actually started YouTube as a way to like deal with a lot of the stigma around Tourette syndrome. And back then in like 2003, that wasn't like cool. Like people weren't talking about like, yeah, let's destigmatize Tourette syndrome. Like that was still like the butt of jokes in a lot of movies. Like
Good for her.
She was doing this like 12, 13 years old. And she was like, she ended up going to Capitol Hill and speaking to help get a bill passed in public school so that kids would, so she was just like this little like fireball, and she was just taking her story and sharing it. So even like in a really positive way, I would look at her like, oh yeah, that's how you do it. But clearly I'm not that. So it took me a long time to realize, hey, guess what? You can literally just share what's from your journal, your artwork, and that's real too, you know. It took me a long time to get there.
And it's going to reach different people. And I love that idea of, okay, I think in some ways when you were trying to fit into a mold of, I'm thinking about the critic, I'm thinking about the, industry person, I'm thinking about this person, like that's exhausting because that's a moving target. It's such a moving target. But when you're thinking about that one person who just needs to hear that they're enough because maybe you need to hear you're enough. That just opens a space, and making spaces for people's pain, making spaces for people's excitement and joy, because we also don't do that well, do we? We don't celebrate people really well. And so I'm so grateful for people like you who are willing to like share a little bit here, see how this goes over here. It resonates with people because I think people are tired in some ways of, the show. Like the thing about your sisters, that's authentically her. And this is authentically you. And I think this chance for us to look inside, because I can't handle, sometimes I'll listen to podcasts again about marketing and that kind of stuff, and it's like this boss babe world, and I'm like, that is just not me.
Yeah, I struggle with that too, because it's like, you definitely, especially you want to support women starting their businesses, and so I subscribe to every podcast I could find because I'm like, yeah, absolutely, I want to support. But then I was like, wait a second, but why am I not on her level? Like, why am I not? So yeah, it creates a really weird thing. And I think, like you said, it's just like, there's room for all of us to be authentically ourselves. And our audiences aren't going to look the same. They might not be the same size. Some of us may not have audiences. Maybe we're community organizers. It's going to manifest in different ways. And I just think that there's a lot more room for that, for sure.
That's actually something that when we talk about making space, what I have realized as I've spoken particularly to women in this genre or era, when we're making space, we have to come at it from abundance. Like there really is space for all of our giftedness and where we're at. And there is space for us to make mistakes. There is space for us to, when we come at it from scarcity, and I think one of the lies that has been told to women in particular, I think it gets told to men as well, is that there's only so many spaces for you, for women who do art. There's only like 4 spaces, and so you got to fight for that. Yeah. And then you start thinking about, how can my work be better than so-and-so's work, instead of like, how can this be what I'm creating? I think about it even as I, do design or fix things or whatever it might be. I think, well, I'm not, professionally trained, or I don't have whatever it might be. And the truth is the moment I get in my head like that, I'm kind of missing the divine spark or the thing that was meant for me. And I can tell when I am jealous of someone, I'm now starting to go, oh, heart, there's something you want in that. Oh, yeah. Oh, heart, there's something that you want to do. And I think we're learning how to raise other women's platforms and how to, even raise different people's projects and processes that they're doing. And it's a new thing because we're trying to get rid of a competitive market, dog eat dog, all that sort of awful imagery. And I the more I get excited for other people, I feel like more space is created. So the more space I make for other people, it just gets bigger. It's not this like, it doesn't get smaller, it gets bigger.
Absolutely.
And when you show up for yourself, you're showing up for other people. And I just so appreciate you doing that. So I absolutely adore talking to you. So I'm going to have you on again, but I want to honor time and make sure that you get a chance to answer the last question, which always is this. When you're thinking about making space for other people as an artist, as someone who collects people's stories, if you think about other people, what is one like tangible way that you feel like whether someone is a community leader or they are an artist, how can they make space for other people's stories? Like, what is a tangible thing you can think of?
Yeah. So one thing that I do when I'm writing for others is, even if it just ends up being in the actual email or message I send back to them, I try to incorporate the exact language that they use and just reflect it back to them. So if they describe what they're going through as healing, or just whatever the specific words are, even if it's just in my response, I don't try to change it and put my interpretation on it. I make sure I start with what they said, the way they described it. So I don't share any of the stories, but I'm trying to give an example of one that I received recently. And the way that she described what she was experiencing, it actually, for me, it triggered a lot of like shame language that I had heard like in a church environment.
Yes.
And it wasn't even to me directly. It was things I had heard like other people say about people in the church. And I was like, whoa, I was furious that that was her language, because it let me know, oh, someone's been feeding this, someone's made her feel this way. And I just kind of had this like righteous anger about it. And the first thing I did was like, I'm enneagram 5. I went into my dissertation mode and I was just like, here's why they're wrong. And then I just backspace all of that. And I was like, you know what? I was like, for her right now, she is feeling shame. I was like, and I need to address that and say, I'm so sorry that you're feeling shame. Because that's the word she used. And yes, there were all these other things that made me want to just like go and find her and give her a hug and go talk to all of these people who made her feel
Make
this
her
way.
change communities.
Yeah, but I was like, let me start with where she is right now. And she came to me from that place, because like, I'm feeling this because of all this other stuff. So yeah, as I literally take a deep breath in saying that, that's just been really important for me, because, you know, when you really start to listen to people's stories, you will get a righteous anger. You will get angry that this person has had to experience this. It's like, this is so unfair. Like, I'm so sorry this happened to you. And I think it's, you know, I think about in my own life, I'm like, you know, I think about the times like my therapist has just literally repeated what I said back to me and said, I'm so sorry, fill in the blank happened to you. And even that, it's just like, okay, someone else said it. Someone else acknowledged that this pain is real. So
and used my words.
Yeah,
and I think
used
that's
my words. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how you stay true and honest to their experiences. Okay, this is how you're reflecting this to me. And it's so hard, isn't it? Not to be like, you have been unjustly treated. And that's true.
Yeah.
But it doesn't in any way less change how they're experiencing it. Oh, that's a great advice. If we're making space for other people, use the language. And I even think about like dominant culture, right? Like, so often dominant culture will use the language that makes sense to us and has a tough time, you know, translating it. But, you know, there's something when you hear something in your own language, and sometimes too, when people reflect it back to us, we're like, do I really feel that way? Is that really what I just said?
Yeah. It's a mirror. That's all it is. You know, it's like when you look in the mirror, somebody's like, oh, I didn't know that was there. You know, I didn't know I had cheese on my face, you know, or, or I didn't know that that's interesting. You know, it just brings awareness, you know, so reflection. So yeah, for me, that's kind of how I see art, because it does get overwhelming. I do sometimes feel pressure. Like again, without giving away, like what I share, I have responded to messages, and the response was, thank you so much for sending this on, but that person's no longer here anymore. Passed away. And that's like, yeah. When that happens, I mean, it guts me every freaking time. And I just have to look at that and say, you know what? There's nothing I can say to bring that person back.
No.
So let me just talk to that person who was on the other end, just for this moment. So yeah, it can go. For me, that's just how I've been finding peace and comfort in all of this. It's just like, you know, let's just find a way to reflect others. I think that's a really good starting point.
Yeah, it's not, as much as it is my story, it's not my story to own. And I think that's the tough part of being a story collector and sharer, is to say, okay, I can sit in solidarity with this person, but it is not my pain to own. And I'm really grateful. Thank you so much for this time. I look forward to us chatting next week for your project that you're working on.
Yes,
that will be so much fun. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. I know that I was challenged by the reminder that we have to allow each person to tell their story in whatever way they currently see it. As we make space for each other's stories, may we make space for difference and growth. This week's inspiring quote actually comes from Morgan herself. Tell the story of the mountain you have climbed. Your words could be a page in someone else's survival guide. Making Spaces is edited by Stephen Burnette from the cult Popcast. The introduction music is It Can Be Done by Ari via Epidemic Sound. If you like this podcast, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and leave us a review. It helps other listeners find us and let us know that we're on the right track.